So this is going to be part two of my reading and analysis of The Devil and Tom Walker. I'm reading from the website that I have linked to my page, and I'm reading pages 4, 5, and 6 at this time. And I'll be teaching in between the reading so that you'll be able to answer the multiple choice questions that I do have set up. When Tom reached home, he found the black print of a finger burnt, as it were, into his forehead, which nothing could obliterate. The first news his wife had to tell him was the sudden death of Absalom Crowninshield, the rich buccaneer. It was announced in the papers, with the usual flourish, that a great man had fallen in Israel. Tom recollected the tree which his best black friend had just hewn down and which was ready for burning. "Let the freebooter roast," said Tom. "Who cares?" He now felt convinced that all he had heard and seen was no illusion. He was not prone to let his wife into his confidence, but as this was an uneasy secret, he willingly shared it with her. All her avarice was awakened at the mention of hidden gold, and she urged her husband to comply with the black man's terms and secure what would make them wealthy for life. However Tom might have felt disposed to sell himself to the devil, he was determined not to do so to oblige his wife, so he flatly refused, out of the mere spirit of contradiction. Many and bitter were the quarrels they had on the subject, but the more she talked, the more resolute was Tom not to be damned to please her. So, one of the questions on your exit ticket I know for sure is, why did Tom not sell his soul to the devil for the gold at first? And the reason why is because his wife is begging him to, and he hates his wife. And you have to understand that if he gets the gold, she gets the reward without any of the sacrifice. He's the one that's going to burn in hell forever. Okay? So watch what she does. At length, she determined to drive the bargain on her own account, and if she succeeded, to keep all the gain to herself. Being of the same fearless temper as her husband, she set off for the old Indian fort towards the close of a summer's day. She was many hours absent. When she came back, she was reserved and sullen in her replies. She spoke something of a black man, whom she had met about twilight, hewing at the root of a tall tree. He was sulky, however, and would not come to terms. She was to go again with a propitiatory offering, but what it was, she forbore to say. The next evening she set off again for the swamp, with her apron heavily laden. Tom waited and waited for her, but in vain. Midnight came. She did not make her appearance. Morning, noon, night returned, but she still did not come. Tom now grew uneasy for her safety, especially as he found she had carried off in her apron the silver teapot and spoons, and every portable article of value. Another night elapsed, another morning came, but no wife. In a word, she was never heard of more. What was her real fate, nobody knows. In consequence of so many pretending to know, it is one of those facts which have become confounded by a variety of historians. Some asserted that she had lost her way among the tangled mazes of the swamp and sank into some pit or slough. Others, more uncharitable, hinted that she had equipped with the household booty and made off to some other province, while others surmised that the tempter had decoyed her into a dismal quagmire, on the top of which her hat was found lying. In confirmation of this, it was said a great black man with an axe on his shoulder was seen late that very evening coming out of the swamp, carrying a bundle tied in a checked apron, with an air of surly triumph. The most current and probable story, however, observes that Tom Walker grew so anxious about the fate of his wife and his property that he set out at length to seek them both at the Indian fort. During a long summer's afternoon, he searched about the gloomy place, but no wife was to be seen. He called her name repeatedly, but she was nowhere to be heard. The bittern alone responded to his voice as he flew screaming by, or the bullfrog croaked dolefully from a neighboring pool. At length it was said, just in the brown hour of twilight, when the owls began to hoot and the bats to flit about, his attention was attracted by the clamor of carrion crows hovering above a cypress tree. He looked up and beheld a bundle tied in a checked apron. and hanging in the branches of the tree with the great vulture perched hard by, as if keeping watch upon it, he leaped with joy, for he recognized his wife's apron, and supposed it to contain the household valuables. Let us get hold of the property, said he consolingly to himself, and we will endeavor to do without the woman. As he scrambled up the tree, the vulture spread its wide wings and sailed off screaming into the deep shadows of the forest. Tom seized the checked apron, but woeful sight! Found nothing but a heart and liver tied up in it. Such, according to the most authentic old story, was all that was to be found of Tom's wife. She had probably attempted to deal with the black man as she had been accustomed to deal with her husband, but though a female scold is generally considered a match for the devil, yet in this instance she appears to have had the worst of it. She must have died game, however, for it is said Tom noticed many prints of cloven feet deeply stamped about the tree, and found handfuls of hair that looked as if they had been plucked from the coarse black shock of the woodsman. Tom knew his wife's prowess by experience. He shrugged his shoulders as he looked at the signs of a fierce clapper clawing. Egad, said he to himself, old Scratch must have had a tough time of it. And then you have some humor here. Tom consoled himself for the loss of his property with the loss of his wife. So the humor is he was upset that she carried off the household valuables, but he got over it because she was dead and he no longer had to deal with her. So that's an example of Washington Irving's humor. All right, I want to go back and I want to go through this because there is a lot to unpack here. The first thing to unpack is what exactly happened. Tom was offered to sell his soul to the devil, but he was like, I need to think about it. And when he went home to tell his wife, she was like, do it, do it. But then he was like, nah, I don't want to make you happy, so I'm not going to do it. So she said, fine, you punk, I'm going to do it myself. And so she goes out to meet with the devil, but he really doesn't want to deal with her. And he tells her, I tell you what, you go home and you get all your valuables and come back. That'll let me know you're serious. So she gets all the silver out of the house. And she comes back and he's like, I still don't know if I want to strike the same deal with you. And so she gets mad and tries to fight the devil. Of course, the devil kills her and he ties her heart and liver up in a tree for wild birds to feed on. But she and her property never seen again. I'm going to tell you like this. There's a couple things that you can analyze from this. The first thing is that Washington Irving, your author, through his fiction, is trying to say that women will fight and argue with anybody, even the devil. That's how argumentative women are. This is a very sexist story. I'm going to give you another piece of advice, another piece of information, excuse me. Notice that she doesn't have a name. Tom has a name. The devil has several names, but she does not have a name. She is always referred to as Tom's wife, aka Tom's property. In the old days, wives were looked at as their husband's property. But more importantly, she doesn't have a name due to the fact that Tom, basically she stands for all women. She could be any woman. And according to Washington Irving, she stands for all women, and all women are greedy, stingy, and argumentative. So this is a very sexist story, a very, very sexist story. And it's kind of a joke to Washington Irving, but today that would be considered sexist, or this would be considered anti-feminist literature. So I wanted to make sure that you had that information, okay? So Tom consoled himself for the loss of his property with the loss of his wife, for he was a man of fortitude. He even felt something like gratitude towards the black woodsman, who he considered had done him a kindness. He sought, therefore, to cultivate a further acquaintance with him, but for some time without success. The old blacklegs played shy, for whatever people may think, he is not always to be had for calling for. He knows how to play his cards when pretty sure of his game. At length, it is said, when delay had whetted Tom's eagerness to the quick and prepared him to agree to anything rather than not gain the promised treasure, He met the black man one evening in his usual woodsman's dress, with an axe on his shoulder, sauntering along the swamp and humming a tune. He affected to receive Tom's advances with great indifference, made brief replies, and went on humming his tune. By degrees, however, Tom brought him to business, and they began to haggle about the terms on which the former was to have the pirate's treasure. There was one condition which need not be mentioned, being generally understood in all cases where the devil grants favors. But there were others about which, though of less importance, he was inflexibly obstinate. He insisted that the money found through his means should be employed in a service. He proposed, therefore, that Tom should employ it in the black traffic. That is to say, that he should fit out a slave ship. However, this Tom resolutely refused. He was bad enough in all conscience, but the devil himself could not tempt him to turn slave trader. Finding Tom so squeamish on this point, he did not insist upon it, but proposed instead that he should turn usurer. The devil being extremely anxious for the increase of usurers, looking upon them as his peculiar people. To this, no objections were made, for it was just to Tom's taste. "You shall open a broker's shop in Boston next month," said the black man. "I'll do it tomorrow if you wish," said Tom Walker. "You should lend money at 2% per month." "Egad, I'll charge 4," replied Tom Walker. "You shall extort bonds, foreclose mortgages, drive the merchant to bankruptcy." "I'll drive him to the devil," cried Tom Walker. "You are the usurer for my money," said the Blacklegs with delight. "When will you want the rhino?" "This very night." "Done," said the devil. "Done," said Tom Walker. So they shook hands and struck a bargain. Before I continue, I want to talk about, unpack some of that. The devil will give you the money, but he wants you to use it for his purposes. It has to be used for evil purposes. So the first thing the devil says is you have to do a slave ship. You have to become a slave trader. Use my money for that. And Tom's like, no. And here's the thing. I want you to get into this. The devil being over slave trading is Washington Irving making another comment. Washington Irving is an abolitionist. And an abolitionist, if you remember from U.S. history, is someone who does not believe in slavery. So this is Washington Irving, in a way, putting into his fiction, into his story, that he's against slavery. So he's an abolitionist. Tom Walker, who is a bad man, a stingy man, a greedy man, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, is all bad, but not bad enough to be a slave trader. So that's important that you know that your author is making that commentary. Now, what Tom is going to become is a usurer. And according to your text, what that is that's somebody who loans money, but asks for a lot of interest back. And notice that the devil says you should lend money at 2% a month. So every month that you don't pay it back, you have to pay another 2% interest. And that is a lot at this time in 1824. And the devil says 2% a month, and Tom says, I'll charge 4. So this makes him do more evil than the devil himself is asking for. So, according to your author, greed is like the worst thing you can be. Greedy slave trader, but greedy is the worst thing you can be. And Tom Walker is very greedy. This is not going to end good. But this is your theme for the story, human greed. And we all are a little greedy. And if I had more time and we were in the classroom, I would delve into that a bit. But there are levels of greed. There are levels of it. And Tom Walker is the greediest you can be. So we already know this isn't going to end good for him. So he's going to loan money to people at high interest when they pay it back. And most people that borrow money don't have any money. Otherwise, they wouldn't need to borrow it. So it's like taking advantage of those who are already in need. All right. A few days, Tom saw Tom Walker seated behind his desk in a counting house in Boston. His reputation for a ready-moneyed man who would lend money out for a good consideration soon spread abroad. Everybody remembers the time of Governor Belcher when money was particularly scarce. It was a time of paper credit. The country had been deluged with government bills. The famous land bank had been established. There had been a rage for speculating. The people had run mad with schemes for new settlements, for building cities in the wilderness. Land jobbers went about with maps of grants and townships and Eldorados, lying nobody knew where, but which everybody was ready to purchase. In a word, the great speculating fever, which breaks out every now and then in the country, had raged to an alarming degree, and everybody was dreaming of making sudden fortunes from nothing. As usual, the fever had subsided, the dream had gone off, and imaginary fortunes with it. The patients were left in doleful plight, and the whole country resounded with the consequent cry of hard times. At this propitious time of public distress, did Tom Walker set up his usurer in Boston. His door was soon thronged by customers, the needy and adventurous, the gambling speculator, the dreaming land jobber, the thriftless tradesman, the merchant with cracked credit. In short, everyone driven to raise money by desperate means and desperate sacrifices hurried to Tom Walker. So basically, Tom was the guy that you borrowed money from when you gambled. You went out and you bought some expensive land thinking it was going to go up in value, and it didn't, and it went down in value, so you owe more on it than it's worth. You needed to borrow money from Tom. So that type of thing, those types of people, okay? People who went out and bought a place thinking there was gold there and spent a lot of money, and then there was no gold, and they were counting on that gold to be able to pay for the land. Those type of people needed to come to Tom for money. So he's very greedy, and he's squeezing them dry with these interest payments, okay? And I will be back for part 3. I'm going to take a little break.